Before we begin today's video, I would like to give a shout out to 3 of our newest subscribers. B. Line, Robert Silvermist, and David Austin. Thank you all for subscribing, and welcome to the family. And now on with today's video. Take a look at this picture here. This is the art for one of the Nagas found in Magic the Gathering, and I must say, it is excellent design. I mean, just look at this shape here. You can clearly tell it is a feminine design, but the chest area is flat, much like that of a male's chest. This is definitely an interesting design option when we are clearly seeing a female sort of shape here, but that alludes to it being fully reptile, since reptiles don't have memory glands like humans do. This contrasts to the Yuan-ti, who are humans who decided to make themselves part snake and do the Charles Darwin with snakes. And much like the Dungeons and Dragons Nagas, the Nagas of Magic the Gathering are very much reptilian, with very few human-esque characteristics. With Magic the Gathering, we see this in arms, while with the Nagas of Dungeons and Dragons, we see some human-like faces. But for all intensive purposes, they are genetically pure snakes. And speaking of Nagas and Yuan-ti, the Nagas of Dungeons and Dragons despise the Yuan-ti to a extreme sense. But with that being said, why don't we take a look at Magic the Gathering's player race in Planeshift Amonkhet to see what type of characters are possible to play as. Greetings, my dear viewers. It is I, Drehan, back once again with Dungeons & Dragons Character Concept, where we take a look at the playable races within Dungeons & Dragons and pair them up with backgrounds and classes to see, within reason of the creature's lore, what type of characters would be sort of generic to play as. This is mostly to give you inspiration for your next character, or perhaps the Dungeon Master is looking for some NPCs to create. Today we are looking at, like I've mentioned in the intro, the Naga from Amonkhet. Now, Magic the Gathering does have Nagas in multiple settings, one such being Amonkhet, with another being Ravnica, and finally Tarkir. And with Planeshift Amonkhet, the Nagas are interesting in that they have a constrict ability, which we only see a grapple-like trait in this manner with one other race, and that is the Simic hybrid from Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, a core setting. So it is definitely an interesting feature to have, and an interesting concept does come to mind right off of the bat with this one feature. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In Magic the Gathering, the Nagas can be found with different class archetypes. That being the Cleric, the Druid, the Fighter, the Rogue, and even the Wizard, with their lore somewhat hinting at them being monks, being sort of harmonious, seeking out peace, and trying to balance between mind and body, even having meditative sort of rituals, which is definitely interesting. And as for backgrounds, I can definitely see them being acolytes, city watchers, dragon casualties for the Nagas of Takia, since they are currently under the rule of one of the dragon lords, faction agents for those from Ravnica, since the ones in Ravnica mostly follow the Golgari clan, which is why Golgari Agent is listed here. Gladiator is another good background, as well as the House Agent, mostly going off of that Tarkia's many different clans. The Initiate, Noble, Sage, Uthgar, Tri-Member, and Vizier are also ideal backgrounds to choose for that baseline Naga. And like I said, this race does have some splendid lore that kind of explains why they are in that plane. Now, I put down City Watch mostly to tie into the Dungeons & Dragons version of the Naga, who were created as guardians of the ancient cities before they were abandoned by their creators. Guardian Nagas, of course, being the main sort of guardians, with Spirit Nagas sort of the more brutish sort of guard, mostly guarding those spells that probably should not be out in the world, and that's probably where some characters could end up turning to, is a Naga based off of the Spirit Naga, or even the Guardian Naga being more of a spellcaster type of character. But with that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at each of the classes and see what subclasses could fit the Naga, given the lore of these races. And the first one I wanted to go with was the Barbarian, with the primal path going with the Ancestral Guardian, Beast, and Wild Magic for the most part, and this is because in Amonkhet, you have a lot of these ties to the world of the dead, to your ancestors. And we can even see this in Tarkir with the Nagas in, what was it, Jultai, Sultai, I can't remember if it was a J or an S, but the ones that are currently under the Dragon Lord of Green, Blue, and Black. Anyway, Ancestral Guardian definitely fit those sort of characters that fit that description. I put Battle Rager here mostly because of that constriction feature that the Nagas had. I thought it worked rather well together, though that is just a personal sort of entry. It really doesn't belong here as far as lore goes, since the Battle Rager is a dwarf restricted subclass, meaning Axe Idiot, which is kind of strange since it mostly goes with your spike armor and less of an axe wielder. Very strange. Anyway, I wanted to go with Beast Barbarian simply for the fact that they are animalistic in nature already. So having abilities that dove more into that animalistic nature sort of made sense. And we're going into the wild magic once again for those sort of magic touched Nagas, and we can see that with a couple of other Nagas from Tarkir primarily. Moving on to the Bard, the Bardic colleges of Eloquence, Lore, Spirits, and Whispers. seem to make the most sense to me. Eloquence mostly for the stereotype of snakes being charmers, having that silver tongue. And for some reason, my tongue's doing that little S thing, so not intended, but it is hilarious, and it's doing that right now for this video. Anyway, the lore bards definitely fit into sort of those Nagas found both in Amonkhet and in Ravnica, where they sort of go through the lore of their own plane, or even their own race, maybe even the lore of other races, trying to learn much as they can. We can see this with a couple of cards, one of them being sort of like an archaeologist almost. I decided to go with spirits for the same reason as we did the ancestral guardians, sort of communicating with these spirits from beyond. It sort of made sense to me anyway. Next is the cleric, and in Amonkhet they serve two gods. The god of wisdom, who is Kefnet, the bird here on the left, and Ronus, the snake, over here on the right, which does seem rather strange that they would serve both of these gods. But to the Naga of Amonkhet, these two gods are two sides of the same coin. Strength and knowledge come hand in hand, which is kind of poetic. But to go off of these two gods here, the divine domains that make the most sense would be the Arcana domain and knowledge domain for our Kefnet followers, while the Ronus followers would be going off of strength. I also put in death, the grave, nature, and peace, just to tie in some of the lore of not only the plane, but of the Nagas in general. Apologies for any outside noises, it is currently raining where I am, so yeah. Again, we're going with the peace domain to sort of tie into that harmony that they seek out on Amonkhet, which is definitely interesting. For death, I did see some Nagas serving the more, I guess, dark gods from Amonkhet, but also for those Nagas from Tarkia who specialize in bringing back the dead, even in Ravnica with the Golgari Nagas. You see a lot of Golgari focusing on the dead, which definitely makes the most sense to go with this route. And I picked Grave since Amonkhet did have that Egyptian sort of feel to it, so it just made sense to have somebody take care of the dead to make sure they were at peace. Moving on to the Druid, probably one of the more common classes that you would pick for your Naga is going to be the Druid, since a lot of them are seeking that harmonious balance, but they also tend to nature. So the most common Druid circles I can see are going to be your Circle of the Land, following mostly the desert, forest, or swamp terrains. And also the Circle of the Spores, going off of those Golgari agents in Ravnica, but also sort of the Tarkia, since the Spore Druid is sort of the Necromancy Druid. Next is Fighter, and this is going to be the most common of the characters that you'll make, but the Fighter is going to mostly follow the martial archetype of the Arcane Archer, the Battle Master, the Champions, the Eldritch Knights, and the Samurai. We actually do have a Ninja Naga from Amonkhet, which is hilarious, but Samurai was the closest I could find to the ninja archetype for a fighter. But Battlemaster also works well, and Champion mostly going off of those who complete the different trials. And of course, Arcane Archer, we do have several Nagas who are indeed archers, which is definitely amusing. And once again, the Eldritch Knight is going off more of the Dungeons and Dragons variant of the Naga, who are primarily spellcasters. Moving on to the monk, there is a monastic tradition of the Ascendant Dragon that I feel works well with any Naga in Tarkir, but also there is a Naga who is a disciple of Ugin, who is the master of colorless mana and is the ghost fire dragon in many different ways. So yeah, the disciple of ghost fire definitely fits well with this ascendant dragon archetype. But other monastic traditions that would work well for the monk, as far as a Naga goes, would definitely be the Astral Self, the Way of Mercy, and the Unearthed Arcana's Way of Tranquility. Again, going off of this sort of harmonious sort of feel that Nagas have, until their god of strength was killed. And right before his last breath, Ronus did give one final blessing to the Nagas, giving them the strength they needed to fight back, which is hilarious. Moving on to the Paladin, I don't see many Nagas taking up the Paladin archetype, but I did think it was worth mentioning. Especially with these three. Sacred Oath of Devotion for those following one of the two gods that they serve, or even those who follow the Dragon Lords over on Tarkir. Those who follow the different trials would most definitely be going after the Sacred Oath of Glory, while the Oath of the Watchers was more of a nod to having to face off against Nicobolus during the final chapter of the Amonkhet block, the Hour of Devastation. Next is the Ranger. I definitely see these for your Archer Nagas. But the ones that made the most sense to me would be, of course, the Beastmaster, the Horizon Walker, Hunter, and Swarm Keeper. That Swarm Keeper more along the lines of the Ravnica's Golgari agents, but I can see that in Amonkhet, especially those who serve the Locust God. Though I'm not sure if they actually do serve the Locust God, it's just one of those gods from Amonkhet that I felt needed a mention. Of course, the Horizon Walker once again going after that sort of battle between Amonkhet and Obnixilis. No, not Obnixilis, Nicobolus. Why did I get those two confused? Nicobolus. But also, since Amonkhet also faced off against the forces of New Phyrexia during the March of the Machines arc. Definitely the Horizon Walker for those purposes. But other than that, Beastmaster and Hunter would probably be your most common. Next is Rogue, another one that would be very much a common class option for a Naga character. I would definitely pick the Arcane Trickster, Assassin, Phantom, and Scout for any Nagas following the Rogue class. Arcane Trickster, once again, going off of the Dungeons & Dragons Nagas, who are sort of spellcaster focused. Moving on to Sorcerer, we have the different Sorceress origins, and a weird one is going to be the Sea Sorcery from Unearthed Arcana, but I felt it was an interesting choice to mention since there are some snakes in real life that do swim in the saltwater oceans. So it was an interesting choice, and there was a Naga called the Naga Drowner. So I thought Sea Sorcery was at least an honorable mention here. But you'll most likely be choosing the Draconic Bloodline for any Nagas in Tarkia that do serve their scaly dragon overlords. Especially since the Nagas of Tarkia do claim that they are descendants of dragons. It's not entirely true, but they do claim it, which is fascinating. Shadow Magic is another good sorceress origin to pick for some of those Nagas who do follow the sort of eternal side of the Battle of Omenket during the Hour of Devastation. And Wild Magic, once again, going off of those odd couple of Nagas who are practitioners of magic. Next is the Warlock, and I picked the Unearthed Arcana Seeker for this, simply for those who follow Nicobolus and his eternal army. It made sense, since Nicobolus is a planeswalker. He is from another plane entirely, even though he created Omenket. I also picked the otherworldly patron of undead and undying for those from Tarkia and Omenket who are indeed undead beings, or even follow a sort of undead patron of sorts. We do see a couple of undead Nagas, sort of lich-like in design, mostly in Tarkia, but I felt that it would need to be mentioned. You could also argue that Ravnica and its Lich King of the Golgari is a good patron to have for this sort of concept. I think his name was Jared? I don't remember. And finally, we have the Wizard with their arcane traditions. I think the most common is going to be your Divination and Necromancy, since a lot of Nagas practice this Necromancy in Tarkia and Omenket. But I also picked Divination because we had a Diviner in Omenket. So I thought it made sense. And there were a couple of Nagas that, in name, seem to point to divination magic. Also picked Blade Singing because that sort of made sense from more of a stereotype, you know, the dudes who play the flute and move around and a cobra comes out of a basket swaying back and forth. That kind of made sense. I also picked the Unearthed Arcana's Onomancy because of Egyptian folklore, being that if a god gives you their true name, you gain their powers. It was kind of weird, but I thought it was a good mention. Also picked Order of Scribes because it just seemed like a sort of arcane tradition that would be perfect for the Nagas, especially those themed after those in Dungeons & Dragons. And with that being said, that is all the time I have for you today. Did you like this video? Let me know in the comment section below, and also let me know what type of Naga character you might be playing in your next campaign. Until then, this has been Drehon, and I am offline.